Alright, let's settle in. Okay, let's settle in. We're moving into a heavy section of Koetting's Evoking Eternity. We've been talking about the power of the group, but here he starts to pivot.
And it feels like a pivot towards something much more lonely.
Exactly. He says that while group rituals are useful and convenient, the experienced evoker starts to see them as something secondary, almost like a curiosity or something you do when you just want entertainment.
Ouch. He's basically calling group magic a party trick.
A party trick that keeps you from losing your mind, Paco.
But look at how he frames the alternative. He says when the practitioner hungers for true power, they go to the temple alone, to bear the very sword of age-old wisdom and stand at the head of their own kingdom.
It's so hyper-individualistic. It's that architect energy we talked about. But it's also terrifying. He's talking about sequential evocation, calling entities one after another, back to back, without a single pause.
Without a break? You can't even catch your breath between them?
No pause. He says the energy from the first spirit creates an inertia that hits the second. He actually suggests a specific strategy here. Identify two entities with similar natures and call the harder one first, then the easier one.
Wait, hold on. He says the harder one first? That sounds like a recipe for a disaster. If you're already draining your battery on a heavyweight, how are you going to handle the second one?
He addresses that. He says the physical and psychological state moves toward exhaustion. He even claims that in rare cases, he and his colleagues have actually lost consciousness before the ritual ends.
Okay, let's stop right there. Lost consciousness. That's not magic, Seth. That's a medical emergency.
But look at what he says about it. He calls it a metamorphosis. He says that when the fragile self is gone, it's the divine I that stays. He's essentially saying, if you pass out, don't worry, your higher self is still running the show.
That is a wild way to justify a blackout. Who finishes the ritual while we are dead before we are resurrected in the flesh. That's heavy, man. That's some serious cosmic horror right there.
It sounds like a way to bypass accountability. I didn't mean to command a demon to eat my house. I was just unconscious.
He does try to add a safeguard. He says we must strive for constant awareness. But then, he immediately jumps into the mechanics of how to keep the momentum going. He says the command to both spirits must be identical in letter and spirit.
Because if they conflict, it's game over. He uses this intense metaphor, a spiritual equivalent of a nuclear chain reaction.
Okay, I've seen enough. I'm staying away from the nuclear magic.
But wait, he provides a cautionary tale. He tells a very story about one of his most ambitious students. This student was obsessed with sigils. He was activating them one after another, trying to solve every problem and fulfill every desire at once.
Let me guess. It didn't end well.
Not at all. The student was found the next morning sitting on a sofa in his ritual robes, staring into absolutely nothing. Just a vacant gaze. He was essentially a vegetable for a couple of days until his normal state returned.
That is so much more haunting than the nuclear part. That's a complete erasure of the person.
It's a warning you can't use magic like a vending machine. If you try to pull every lever at once, you don't get all the prizes, you just break the machine.
Exactly. He says the power of intention is what overcomes everything. You have to focus on a single goal, not everything at once.
Easier said than done when you're staring at a sigil in a dark temple.
But he moves straight into the how-to. He actually gives us a specific ritual for two spirits, Dumkael and Fertal, the brothers of the southern winds.
They say these two are great for inclining people to agree with the magician's will. A bit manipulative, isn't it?
Perhaps. But he lays out the setup. One altar facing south, two sigils, face down. One triangle of manifestation in the southeast for Dumkael, one in the southwest for Fertal. Even specifies the incense rose for one, pine for the other.
He's getting very specific now. It's like a recipe for a very dangerous cake.
He describes the process of activating the first sigil. You look at it, establish the connection, and then you use a ritual dagger to touch the parchment, letting the all-powerful force pass through the blade into the paper.
And then, according to him, the first signs of the spirit's physical presence are dizziness and shortness of breath.
My shoulders are feeling that weight again, just hearing it.
He ends this part with the practitioner lifting a cup of liquid over their head, staring between the two triangles, trying to bridge that gap between the physical and the other. Okay, we're back in the thick of it. We left off with a setup for the Brothers of the Southern Winds, and now Koetting moves into the actual visceral performance of the rite.
And it starts with drinking?
Yeah, he describes this part as the wine of God. He says the practitioner should drink it, saying, "I drink the blood of God, I absorb all his power." And he describes the sensation of the elixir streaming through your veins, driving out any exhaustion to revive you for the rest of the ritual.
Right, because nothing says focused magical intent like a shot of divine blood to prevent a mid-ritual nap.
Hey, if it keeps you from becoming a vegetable like that student we talked about, I'm in.
Well, he says the purpose is to prepare the space. He has you placing your hands on the altar, palms down, over the sigils. And then for Duncal, you have to trace the lines of the sigil with a ritual dagger and transfer your desire into the paper.
He uses this really heavy language here. He says, when the paper and ink turn into spirit, the entity will already be tangibly present. He describes Duncal as this spiritual giant waiting in a mist.
It's a lot of psychological heavy lifting. You're basically trying to hallucinate a giant into existence through sheer willpower.
But he claims the momentum is the key. He explicitly says that while people think calling two entities is harder, the momentum created by the joint invocation actually helps. He even says that if you follow the basic principles, the magic happens even without the mage's direct interference.
See, that's what I mean. He's saying the chain reaction is already set in motion. He's basically saying the trap is set, now just try not to get eaten.
And then he drops the warning. He says anyone trying evocation without specific goals or proper preparation will invoke what is beyond their understanding, and the result will be terrifying.
It's that same theme of losing control. He says once the smoke thickens and the white mist appears in the triangles, it is no longer possible to stop the forces that have been set in motion.
He gives the actual command next. It's incredibly commanding. Dumkael, Fertal, brothers of the southern winds, come into this world from the worlds beyond. Manifest in these triangles, in this eternal temple, on this plane of flesh and enough matter.
On this plane of flesh and matter. Man, he's not leaving much to the imagination. He's practically inviting them to come and sit on your face.
He says the tension becomes unbearably intense. He warns that the dizziness will be on the verge of causing loss of consciousness. And then, and this is the part that always gets me, he tells you to keep chanting their names until you fall into oblivion.
Until you fall into oblivion. So, once again, the goal is to completely lose your mind. He's basically prescribing a controlled seizure.
But look at the goal. He says it's to let everything that was material and mortal die, so that you can see the bodies of the brothers forming in the south.
Okay, so we summon the brothers. We've almost passed out. What's next? More fainting?
Actually, he shifts gears to something even bigger. The Tower Guardians.
Oh boy, here we go, the heavy hitters.
He claims the four cardinal directions, north, east, west, south, are ruled by these guardians. He says modern New Age magic completely fails to grasp their nature because they are permanent and enough and unchanging, and have a natural connection to the earthly world.
He's contrasting them with the archangels. He says while it is difficult to dispute the power of the four archangels, their power pales before the irresistible power of the four guardians.
Wow. He just demoted Michael and Gabriel. That's a bold move, even for a black magic manual.
He's demoting them and replacing them with something much older. He mentions the Maya deities, Ish, Kalak, Khan, and Mulak, saying their rites were ancient and sometimes bloody, and that they shake the very foundations of reality.
It's a classic move. The stuff you know is cute, but the stuff I'm telling you about is ancient and terrifying.
But he gives a specific method. If you want to call the archangels, you go east, west, north, south. But if you want the demonic kings, Beelzebub, Satan, Azazel, and Astaroth, you set up the altar facing south.
He's really leaning into the hierarchy here. It's all about which way you point the altar and which way you rotate the clock.
Exactly. And he tells you to activate the sigils in a specific direction depending on who you're calling. Clockwise for the angels, counterclockwise for the demons. He says if you do it right, you'll hear their voices carried on the wind or see the room flickering with light.
It sounds so overwhelming. Like the entire atmosphere of the room is being overwritten by something else.
He ends this section with a great invocation for all the guardians at once. And the final instruction is the most intense. He says, let the flow of the Sidera text, dritual, escape the control of your imperfect will and find its own will.
There it is. The way to avoid responsibility. Don't blame me. My imperfect will lost control, and now there's a demon in the kitchen.
Hey, if the divine will wants a slice of pizza, who am I to argue?
But that's the point of the whole book, isn't it? The tension between the architect who commands and the devotee who surrenders. Whether you're building a kingdom or letting the kingdom build you. We're at the climax of the ritual description now. The tension is peaking. He describes the Tower Guardians finally taking shape in their triangles around the circle. He says the incense smoke thickens into a shimmering white mist, and their images manifest as their presence densifies in this world.
It sounds so ethereal, like the boundary between us and them is just dissolving.
And then he gives the command. He tells the practitioner to turn to the east or south depending on the spirit and recite the conjuration. It's very direct. I call and command you to manifest yourself in this temple, to appear before me in visible form and speak to me with a distinct voice.
A distinct voice. Because heaven forbid they show up and just whisper cryptically, he wants a clear audio connection.
I mean, if I'm summoning a demon, I want to know if it's actually there or if it's just my tinnitus.
But look at the sequence here. He says the first spirit starts forming its body from subtle etheric particles. And as that white mist thickens, you move to the next triangle. You go around the circle, clockwise or counterclockwise, and then, and this is the part that ties back to the chaos we mentioned, you return to the first spirit and shout, "Tower Guardians, appear."
And that's when everything breaks. He says their presence becomes more dense and tangible, and the whole operation takes on a more chaotic character than before.
Of course, because orderly is too boring for a ritual involving the Tower Guardians.
He describes it as intense. Their forms flicker violently, appearing and disappearing in your field of vision. Their voices fill the world with clatter and noise, and their energies permeate the temple, mixing right above the altar.
That sounds less like a ritual and more like a construction site in the middle of a thunderstorm.
And then, he brings us back to that architect idea. He says, once all four are standing in their triangles, you must slowly face each one, giving them the same single instruction, one by one. But, and here's the heavy part, he says, you will feel a clear and intense tension of conflicting energies, trying to stay in balance.
And he says, you are the one who has to hold it.
Exactly. He says, you must become a centrifuge for the swirling forces and energies, pulling them in while simultaneously subjecting the flow of the ritual to your absolute will.
A centrifuge. So you're a high-speed laboratory instrument.
That is a massive amount of pressure. If you slip, even for a second, that centrifuge just explodes.
But he offers a way to use that tension. He introduces a concept that is almost beautiful, in a twisted way. He says you can evoke entities whose inner nature is absolutely opposite, but whose divine purpose is perfectly aligned.
Oh, I love this. This is like the alchemy of the soul.
He gives an example, the Archangel Raphael, the divine healer, and the Goetic demon Marbas. He says one is a healer of the Sephiroth, and the other is a demon who supposedly brings souls to perdition.
One heals, one destroys. That sounds like a recipe for a massive headache.
But look at his logic. He says their function is the same, to heal the human spirit. Raphael uses pure divine energy, while Marbas uses very dense energies coming from the earth, specifically the Muladhara, or root chakra. He says this combination works miracles.
So it's like combining high-voltage electricity with a massive grounding wire. It's still dangerous, but it actually gets the job done without blowing the circuit breaker.
Exactly. But then he moves into something even more radical. He starts a new section called Evoking Legions.
Legions? That's not a ritual anymore. That's an invasion.
He starts with a personal memory. He tells us about a painting he saw when he was 16, a young sorcerer in a twilight cave, holding a glowing sword and a leather-bound grimoire, surrounded by legions of demons. He says the image of the demons wailing in the darkness has never left his memory.
A bit cliche, isn't it? The mysterious painting trope.
Maybe, but he uses it to make a claim. He says for a long time, he thought it was just a metaphor for human power. But then, he says, he actually did it. He performed evocation where he summoned a multitude of entities at once.
Waited once? Like a whole crowd?
He says he didn't believe it was possible for one person to command legions. He thought he'd accidentally opened forbidden gates to an unknown universe. But when the ritual ended and the spirits all returned through the gates, the goal was achieved in an incredibly short time.
So, he's basically saying, I accidentally summoned an army and it worked great. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
It's such a terrifying way to learn. No training, just accidental mass summoning.
He explains the mechanics, though. He says you can't use individual sigils for everyone in the crowd like that. It's too much. You have to change the ritual to establish sufficient contact with a group of entities rather than each one individually.
And he brings up the tools again, the magic squares.
Right. He says while sigils connect the mage's mind to a specific spirit, magic squares are much more extensive and complex. He claims they act as multidimensional portals that can be used to travel between dimensions or summon vast legions.
A multi-dimensional portal made of numbers and letters. It sounds like he's trying to turn math into a teleporter.
But he says the real magic isn't in the math or the aesthetics. It's in the hidden geometry of the corners and the sacron meaning of the words. He says a master can use them to open gates to the transcendental.
It's all so much scale. We went from a single person in a room to a person commanding entire universes.
And that's where we have to leave it for today. The scale of what he's describing It's hard to even wrap your head around without feeling that centrifuge tension himself. Let's pause the cosmic scale for a second. My stomach is definitely feeling that centrifuge tension.
Perfect timing. The delivery guy just buzzed the French feast has arrived.